Lindsay and Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yay, I'm so excited. Okay, so to do a quick little introduction, we're in the middle of a series called Who's in Your Circle, and we're talking about the relationships that shape and influence kids ministry leaders, how they lead, and ultimately how they can lead for the long haul. And so today I am so excited because you guys are talking about volunteers, and volunteers is such a crucial relationship that kids ministry leaders have, and both of you are volunteers. And so I just think you guys are going to bring so much wisdom to the conversation on what it actually feels like to be a volunteer. So why don't you kind of kick us off? Or I'm going to have you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive in so people can kind of get a voice to a name and all that fun stuff. So Lindsay, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what did I need you to answer? I need you to answer, why you like serving in the local church.
That's good. I can answer that. My name is Lindsay, and I grew up in the Texas area, and I've always grown up in church. I was a first grade teacher for 14 years, so I love being with kids in any context. They're just really fun. And recently moved to Colorado and moved actually for the church and switched careers. And so now I'm a financial planner because that makes sense. So I have always valued serving in the church. I think I've just always grown up doing it, which is part of it. So it's been modeled for me. But I think it's important because I just believe it's an aspect of obedience. And so God calls us to do that. And so I think it disciples us to be more like Christ. It helps us learn how to live sacrificially. It helps us to be more dependent. Helps us to be more dependent and rather than independent and living with community. And so I just think it's a really important aspect of our Christian walk is to serve. So
Yeah. Okay, I have a quick question for you before we let Sarah introduce herself. When
great.
you were teaching, were you
Yeah.
also serving in kids ministry?
Great question. I was, but I specified. I taught first grade, and I asked to serve in really young children. So like
Nice.
1-year-olds was my room. So I
Yeah.
had to differentiate. They had a kindergarten room, and I said maybe not, please, just for a break. So and it was good. I loved getting to just have a different context of kids. So it
Yeah.
was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, Sarah, your turn. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about why you like serving in the local church?
Yes. So my name is Sarah. I have been in Colorado since '06. Like Lindsay, we came from the same previous church in Texas, and that's where I plugged into serving. So for me, I came to faith at 10, and I just recall like church camps, just being involved in Sunday schools, and those leaders being a really big influence in my faith, in my upbringing. So why not? With my gift of singleness, I think the Lord has just called me into this type of ministry. Just being able to serve alongside others. It's kind of my way of networking and making friends, as well as pouring into the lives of these kids that, often don't have the gospel taught in their homes or what they're being discipled at school and things like that. So how can I come alongside them and show them that God loves them, and just hopefully that they will come to Christ at an early age, hopefully. And if not, remember those times. And I mean, nothing's better than having the kids like run up to you in the lobby at church and just like hug your neck.
Yeah.
For me, it's just such a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. We love to hear fun stories about why volunteers choose to serve and how they end up sticking around and serving for a long time. And it's always fun to hear those stories. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So we already talked about how the kids ministry relationship with a volunteer is crucial, right? Sundays cannot happen without a team of volunteers. And I'm sure you guys have served alongside and underneath a handful of different kids ministry leaders as job transitions, as new leaders come in, and as you guys continue to serve in these church environments. To kind of like take a step back almost before we get into the weeds about what it looks like to be a volunteer, I would love for you guys to share like what are some qualities or attributes that you admire in a kids ministry leader as you guys are following them and hearing vision from them. What are some things that stick out to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that are helpful, but I think some of the high points for me are a leader that's a clear communicator. somebody who both is able to share the vision of like what they want this ministry to be about, the why, and the heart of it. I think that's really helpful to have communicated, but also just expectations of me as a volunteer, like what do I need to do to make this a success, to pour into these kids the best, to be the best support for both you and those that we're serving. That side of communication, but I think the other side is like that they're available to hear and like to have feedback,
Mm,
and it could just even be for like their presence. I think that's a big thing of just being in the hallways and like available to say, hey, how's it going? Like it doesn't have to be a 20-minute conversation. Just their presence and availability, I think, is a really helpful thing to have. So.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Sarah, what about you?
100%. I'll echo that. I mean, those are a lot of the things that I thought of too. I also think they're just real people, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
love a leader that can banter, that can laugh, that can just be just like us. Like, I think
Yeah.
sometimes we go into ministry and we put these people on a pedestal and like they don't, oh, they're not walking in sin or whatever the case may be. And like stuff happens. And like to be vulnerable, I think is huge, and
Yeah.
say, hey, I need prayer in this, or I'm walking through
Mm-hmm.
this. Like they are just like we are. And I think that relationship just bind so well together when they're just raw and honest.
Yeah. Yeah, a really good point because sometimes I don't know if this is like volunteer initiated or kids ministry leader initiated, but
Mm.
sometimes there's this barrier of like, well, I can't share what I'm actually going through because I'm technically like your leader.
Mm.
And I don't know, that's why I'm like, I wonder where that came from, or like who kind of puts up that barrier, because there is this reality that like we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And yes, you are leading this ministry and I get to serve alongside you and serve underneath you, and that's great. But like first and foremost, like we are a church family and I want to care for you and light, and that same goes for volunteers. Like volunteers share things with the kids ministry leader because they want to feel cared by the family of God. And so I don't know. That's just interesting, an interesting thought. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
good observation that you made, Sarah, of like, we're all people and we all walk through hard things.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that and
Yeah.
not, and just lower the barrier a little bit to, because there could be some sweet friendships that come out of that relationship, which kind of leads me into my next question of, as you think back over the years of being a volunteer, what does the relationship look like? What should this relationship look like? Talk about kind of, should it be more of a friendship or a mentorship, or and I'm sure these relationships have changed for you over the years. When you started
Mm-hmm.
out serving, you were a lot younger, and maybe now like the kids ministry leader is younger than you, and that changes the dynamic of things. So like think about your own relationships with the kids ministry leaders that you've worked with, and think about like what has the relationship looked like over your experience.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I was thinking about what you're saying, Lauren, just about friendship, and being vulnerable. And I wonder if some of the leaders just don't have the capacity to feel that. Like, think about the church that we came from before. It was really huge, and to
Mhm.
have that kind of vulnerability with every volunteer, I,
Totally.
I mean, I cannot imagine, even if I wasn't leading, to do that. Like, that just sounds
Yeah.
exhausting. And so I wonder if there is a barrier, but not of like, don't talk to me, but just like, I only have so much to give, you know? And so I think I go into a volunteering with, I don't have that expectation of like a deep friendship. I welcome the brother sister relationship. Like, you are my
Mhm.
brother sister. I'm going to invest in you like I would any other church member, any other Christian, because you're valuable, any other person really, because you're valuable.
Yeah.
And so I want to treat them like a person and realize they're going to make mistakes and give them grace and forgiveness and give them encouragement and that kind of thing. But I'm not expecting like, let's go hang out 3 times a week. And how
Right.
come you didn't share this? You're having a stressful day. Why won't you tell me why? You know, like there's just a capacity that they have that I think we need to just be aware of as volunteers.
Mhm.
And I think that's the way we can serve them. Hey, do you want to talk about it? If not, that's great. Like,
Yeah.
you need a listening ear, awesome. If that's too stressful for you, like, how can I just serve you? I think that's really helpful. As far as like they're the leader, and so you have this mentorship idea of, I look up to them. They're mentoring me, and I've had that for sure, and I still have that to a degree when I'm serving, because in this specific area that I'm serving in, they probably are more of an expert than I am. Like they at least have a better grasp on what they want this to look like than maybe I do coming
Mhm.
into it, and so I want to learn from them. And that could be, it could just be a big learning, like through training or through um, a large group environment, but could also just be like, hey, thanks for that word of encouragement, or thanks for just
Yeah.
seeing what I'm doing and calling me up to do more things like that. And just the availability. Like I was talking about presence, I think if they are available for those conversations, I think that can establish a relationship of just trust and confidence. And it doesn't have to be best friends all the time, but it could just be
Yeah.
like, I value who you are and I want to hear what you have to say. And I also want to encourage you. So I don't know if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
great. That's really helpful. Sarah,
Yeah.
what do you think about when you think about this relationship?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think it's both. For me, it's been different in each environment. So I've had 2 to 3 leaders in my time in ministry in this capacity. And I think the one prior to Lindsay's point, we came from a very large church. And it was more just like clear expectations. I could go to this person with anything, but I wasn't like grabbing coffee with them or, talking to them
Mhm.
too long. Where I'm at now, I feel like I have more of that friendship aspect just because maybe the age, just kind of our life
Mm,
circumstances, just if they have kids in ministry, so it kind of binds that relationship. And yeah, more from like, hey, how can I encourage you? How can I be praying for you? I
mm-hmm.
think that's where I come from. And if it's reciprocated back to me, fantastic. But I know, yeah, in a capacity where there's hundreds of volunteers, like, yeah, their time is limited and they're serving in multiple, you know, disciples or
Mhm.
discipleships across the church, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think the expectation should be they're there to, lead you and guide you and be there for any certain things that happen with a kiddo. But if something forms out of that and blossoms, wonderful, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Let's talk about a little bit more specifics. So, as you think about the different leaders and different things for you as a volunteer, and we kind of touched on this a little bit about the training piece and making sure you guys have what you need when it comes to helping you succeed. And you might need to think back to like when you were first a volunteer, because you guys have been volunteering for a long time, and so you guys had kind of have the flow down of like this is how it is a small like this is how I'm a small group leader and this is how I teach large group and all those things. But like think back to you as a new volunteer. What has helped you succeed as a volunteer in the kids ministry capacity?
Yeah. That's a good question. The first thing I thought of was, this is maybe not as specific as you want, but making it a joyful environment. Like,
No, that's
um,
important.
yeah, when Sarah was talking about that earlier, just the laughter, I'm like, yeah, I was more encouraged to serve in a place that I wanted to be in, like
Yeah.
that they didn't take themselves too seriously. It wasn't like harsh. It wasn't boring. It was just like everyone was enjoying themselves and there was laughter and fun. And that was important for me. But especially early on, I think what was really important for me, who's very like type A, like I need to know the right way to do something, is when I would have someone I was volunteering with that had done this before. And so being with someone who's
Yeah.
experienced, like just being paired in a room with somebody who knew what was going on, it was so helpful. And then the
Mhm.
weeks that I was in rooms where we were both new, I felt so lost. And
Yeah.
because the minister that's leading can't be in my room the whole time with me, and they have a lot
Right.
of people they're serving, and so I think having that resource of information and just modeling how we do ministry here, I think was really
Mhm.
helpful at the beginning. So,
Yeah. I want to zoom in on the joyful environment that you guys have both talked about
mm,
is how do you create that?
yeah, that's a great question.
I mean, you
um,
have to like kids. Like, if you don't like kids, you
Right.
should not volunteer. So let me put that out there. I think,
Right. Right.
I mean, it naturally should just exude off your face. Like, you should, I mean,
Mhm.
yes, everybody has bad days. You come in tired and weary to church. I get that. But like, when you're back there, like, how cool is it that you can minister to a child that might accept
Mm.
Jesus? Like, that's
yeah,
just
Yeah.
awesome. So, like, if that's where your heart is, it should just naturally flow out. I don't know. I'm just a joyful person predominantly all the time.
You
So I
are.
try to be. But so I just think like if you're back there, like you shouldn't be like Eeyore, it should just be like, let's
Yeah.
go.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
about,
So that,
yeah,
go ahead, Lindsay.
I think about the ministers and just even the other volunteers that like helped establish that. And they're just constantly pointing out the good. It was just like, can you
Mm,
believe, let me just tell you the story about what just happened. It was so fun. Or like, this is a hilarious experience. Let's talk about it together. Or again,
yeah.
not taking yourself too seriously when this kid, throws up all over you or whatever it is that could be disastrous and you hate this experience. But really
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, here we go. Let's go round two. We got this. I don't know, just the attitude going into it. I think both the
Mm-hmm.
volunteers bring that as well as the ministers coming down of like how they respond to things and also what type of words they're speaking. Is it always complaining or is it always fun, enjoyable stories? Is it always here's do this, or like, hey, I saw that. That was awesome. Like, let's celebrate that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful. I think when it comes to cultivating a joyful environment, sometimes it's hard to put words to that, but it is. It's the laughing. It's the
Mhm.
what I like to think is how can you create inside jokes with your people? Whatever, like it's but maybe it's a funny story or a
Yeah.
kid says something funny or you do something as a team together because those are the things that like months from now you're gonna be like, remember that? Remember when we did that? Like that was so
Yeah.
funny. And then it's like everyone's gonna laugh and it's gonna be a great time.
Yeah.
But I also think it's how you are communicating on Sunday mornings. And
Mm.
a lot of kids ministry leaders can get stuck in like the deer in the headlights of like, oh my gosh, there's so much happening around me. And you kind of have to that
Mm.
like quick on your feet and being able to be 100% with whoever you're standing in front of when there's like a bajillion other things that
Mm.
can be going on in your world. It's like, no, I'm
Yeah.
standing in front of Lindsay and Sarah, and they are who I'm talking to right now. And then kind of, okay, now that conversation is over, I'm moving on to the next thing. And so I think it's important to hear that the environment matters
Yeah.
to volunteers. And so that's just important. And I like what you guys had to say about what matters to you. Okay, keep going about how can a kids ministry leader help their volunteers succeed? So Sarah, does anything come to mind? And I think I have another question to ask you about that, but I'll let Sarah
Yeah,
share first.
sure. I do like, so I'm very spontaneous and I have, but I also like the structure. So, like having the curriculum ahead of time, I'm a weirdo when I read it first because I do
Same.
want to be able to, like, I'm a three, okay? I just have to know. Um, but it's nice to know because then if there's something that, like, oh my gosh, that Bible story might trigger this question because I serve in like
Mm.
9 and 10-year-olds. So they are
Mm-hmm.
inquisitive. And so I think
Yep.
depending on which age range you have, things might come out of that Bible study that you need to kind of be prepared for. So I like to look at it ahead of time. So I think that's one. But yeah, it's got to be a balance. It's got to be, there's fun, there's grace, because if something drops the ball, if there's not enough coloring sheets, okay, pivot, go grab something. Um, you know, Having good markers, and I mean, this is trivial, but like enough drawing materials like
Yes.
crayons, markers, and coloring pencils. Like sometimes those are low, and it makes it hard for the kids to draw when you have 29 kids. So that's
And
just
10
something
pencils.
that, yeah. So just having like the resources ready, but also having grace on the person that like there's other things going on, and like maybe the colored pencil isn't right important right now.
Yep.
Your presence with the child and teaching the lesson is what matters. So that is
Yeah.
all secondary.
Yeah. Okay, my follow-up question to this is there's kind of like a couple different pieces that a volunteer plays on a Sunday morning.
Mm.
They are like the welcome committee. So they're making
Mm.
kids feel like they belong in a classroom. They are managing a classroom similar to how a school teacher would do it, like just managing behaviors and helping kids stay on track or listen or follow along. And but then there's what's unique to a Sunday morning is there's the discipler piece.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not only are you welcoming kids, not only are you managing a classroom, but you are teaching them the gospel. And most people get really nervous when they're tasked with the job to share the gospel and teach
Mm.
kids about Jesus.
Mm.
How or what things, and maybe this wasn't from a kids ministry leader, but how have you been further equipped to talk about Jesus and to talk about maybe those odd stories? I mean, this is going to come out right before Easter, and like between the Easter weekend, between Good Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday, there's a lot of questions that can come up in kids ministry. And so
Mm.
how have you been equipped, either from church leadership or kids ministry leaders specifically, to handle those hard conversations and to
Mm.
actually be a good disciple who then disciples other people?
Yeah. Yeah, you're hitting on something that I think is, it's like understood but maybe not ever explicitly said, or often explicitly said, of like,
Mhm.
as we're serving, we're pouring out, and we need to be just as equally be poured into. And I
Yeah.
think we get burnout a lot because we're just called to serve and serve and serve, and it's like, yes, it is important, but we're limited, and like, we need to be poured into in order to pour out. And so, I mean, our own time in the word is vital, but I also
Yeah.
think, like, for me personally, I've just done a lot of Bible studies. I've done a lot of like a training program, literally, to learn more about my faith and the story, to be able to frame it in different contexts, specifically for kids or for adults
Mhm.
or for new believers, or um, and that type of training has been super helpful. But if specifically in kids context, I think this is at both churches I was at, they will put in the lessons like exactly what you can say, and you
Yeah.
can just read it, and that's okay. Like, it's still the gospel, whether it's from your brain or from the paper, it's still true,
Mhm.
if it's the word. And so I think those, especially at the beginning of learning how to frame it in a 6-year-old classroom versus a 10-year-old classroom, like, it's just different. And so
Yeah.
having that explicitly said was really helpful at the beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Sarah, what about you for your age group, teaching that like upper elementary age group? How have you been trained to ask those hard questions? Like, clearly you're an all-star volunteer and you read the curriculum ahead of time and you're thinking about these questions that may get asked. But what has helped you do that?
Yeah, I mean, to Lindsay's point too, studies and theological classes, like the more that you can, read the word and just let it soak in, the better.
Mhm.
It, but it's just like a simple. I mean, it's simple.
Mm.
Honestly, it's like I think I just go back to just attending church like most of my life, and it's just really you're a sinner. I mean, just going through like as
Yeah.
like cliche as that sounds, I've probably learned more sitting in the audience with the kids
Mm.
hearing the gospel every single Sunday. And I just
Mm.
take those nuggets and I'm like, we do hand motions and like
Mm.
I just remember that. So it's like the
Yeah.
way it's portrayed and coming down from the leaders and flowing into the classrooms, I just like soak that up and then just execute it that way. So I mean, yeah, I
No,
know
that's
it's not
helpful.
simple, but it's like
Yeah.
I think if a kid was like, Miss Sarah, I want to accept Christ, like I can do it. It might be clunky
Yeah.
because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay, let's go. But like, you know, I think I could do it with
Yeah.
this many years under my belt. And it's just like just soaking in from all aspects of what the church offers. So like anything that you can make the time for that the church offers,
Mhm.
do it. Just do as
Yeah.
much as you can.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah. And
helpful. And I think,
can I add
oh, go
something to
ahead,
that?
Lindsay.
No, I was
Yes.
just going to say, in addition to that, I think thinking about the kind of questions that you would get in your age group versus, I've done younger usually. I think it's just really helpful to hear as a volunteer. It's okay to say, I don't know. Like, to tell
Mhm.
the kids, I don't know the answer to that. Let's go find out, or let's go pull somebody else in, or like, let me go look at the word this week, and I'll get back to you next week. And like, I just think modeling that for kids, just to say, hey, these are really good questions you're asking, and just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean that it's the wrong question, or that you're not equipped, or
Yeah.
that the Lord's not good. Like, I just think that's important, especially in volunteering for the first time, of I don't know the answer to everything, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's helpful.
for
Yeah.
sure.
That
I
happened.
often do that. I'm like, go ask pastor. I've done that. I'm like, don't ask me, go ask pastor.
Yes, that happened to me. I mean, as a parent and like a kids ministry leader,
Mm.
I was picking up my daughter from the 3-year-old classroom, and you guys know my daughter. Uh, And the volunteer was like, she asked a question and I don't know how to answer it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds like her.
Yep.
So it's like very, very on brand. The question was about the Trinity. And so I'm like,
Perfect.
okay,
Yeah.
let's talk
Yeah.
about let's go home and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's good for the kids ministry leader to hear that you guys have been encouraged not just from kids ministry leaders, but from church leadership to
Yeah,
participate in discipleship spaces.
for sure.
And I love what you said, Lindsay, about how it's kind of assumed, but maybe not explicitly given to them as a task of like, hey,
Mm.
you are discipling these kids. And in order to prevent burnout, I mean, so many kids ministry leaders are like, oh, my volunteers are burnt out. My volunteers are burnt out. And it's like, okay, let's take an assessment on who's pouring into these volunteers so that
Mhm.
they can continue to pour out.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good reminder. It doesn't have to be just the kids ministry leader. I mean, you guys have been poured into from leaders inside
Mhm.
the church and outside the church and outside of kids ministry and in multiple different ministry areas.
Yep.
And it's okay for that to be the case. So
Mhm.
the kids ministry leader shouldn't be hearing, oh, well, I have to now pour into all of my volunteers.
No.
It's no,
Yeah.
no, no,
No.
no. You encourage them and resource them
Mhm.
with other opportunities to be poured into. And sometimes that's from the kids ministry leader and sometimes it's not. And that's
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So I think that was really great and
Yeah.
really helpful. Okay, we're going to get to a fun question. We're going to talk about appreciation
Mm.
because this is a huge part about kids ministry leaders and feeling appreciated, and everybody feels appreciated different ways. Some people want gifts and some people want words of encouragement, and some people would just like to be left alone and they don't need anybody's encouragement because they offered themselves their own encouragement. Um, but as you think about celebrations that you've been to or appreciation events that you've been to, what for you as a volunteer, what has been some of your favorite things over the years, or an event that you got invited to, or a way that a kids ministry leader has appreciated you?
Yeah. There's lots of ways, and different ways depending on the size of your ministry, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think of my favorite way, and this is again, there's some personal aspect to of how I receive appreciation. But our volunteers were given a dinner, and it's food, so that's always a good thing.
Yep.
B, it gave us a chance to actually intermingle with other volunteers, because when you're in the classrooms, like, those one or two really well, and then you leave. And so it was a really cool opportunity to actually get to meet with them, and that in and of itself was encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the dinner, the leaders would just offer words of encouragement, different verses. We got to sing together. Like, it was just a really sweet time. And while it does take time to commit to an extra thing like that, it was
Yeah.
more filling than exhausting. And that was one of my favorite things that they've done. Words of encouragement are always good, just little notes every once in a while. Don't expect it, but it's just kind of a nice surprise when you get it every once in a while. So
Yeah. It's like, I see you and you've been
yeah,
doing a great job.
yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, what about you?
I,
What's been one of your favorites?
it's exactly
Yeah,
what I have in my imagination, and we were probably there together. So
probably.
great. Yeah, that is what like came to my mind first when you asked that question. It's just, yeah, I don't really need stuff. We have lots of cups and mugs and things, and it's nice, but it does pile up in the cabinet. So
hmm
I mean, do I love a new shirt? Sure, yeah, of course,
Yep.
absolutely. I do. I don't mind a shirt. But yeah, going back to Lindsay's point, I vividly remember just fellowshipping with other leaders in a big table, like of 8 or 10 people,
hmm
just sharing stories, hearing from not just the kids minister, but the entire staff,
hmm
coming up on
Mm-hmm.
the stage to just, share moments of reflection, share appreciation,
Yeah.
handwritten notes to, yeah, I mean, everything that Lindsay said that is the way that I love getting the appreciation too.
Yeah. That's good. So what we're hearing is no more mugs.
I mean, maybe sometimes mugs if they're like really cool and cute and they have a good logo on
Yeah.
it, maybe.
Oh yeah.
But
Everyone wants a good branded mug,
yeah,
Yeah.
obviously.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to see maybe like a journal or a leadership book, like a discipleship book.
Oh
I,
yeah,
I, I'm a
that's good.
I'm a reader. I like to read. I like to, and not everyone does. I get that, but yeah, I mean, a journal and a piece of dark chocolate, That sounds good to me.
Okay, listeners out there, to get
Right?
Sarah a gift, a
Yeah.
journal and a piece of dark
My
chocolate.
address is 40.
Oh,
Amazing.
that's so good. Okay, as you think about engaging with a kids ministry leader, and is there a space in the kids ministry where you want to be asked your opinion?
Mm,
Like, is there ever a time where you were like, oh, I wish that I could have spoken into this, or I
mm.
wish that my voice could have been heard just a little bit more in this decision or for this event? Has there anything been like that that has happened where you just wish that you would have been asked a question?
Hmm. I can't think of anything as far as like a large church decision or a large ministry
Mm-hmm.
decision necessarily. I think I have a little bit of a unique perspective from being a teacher. I, I sometimes will wish that I could help other volunteers with like classroom management, or I
Yeah.
just feel like I have things to offer in that area that
Mm-hmm.
others may not, just as they have things that I don't have. And so I
Yeah.
think there have been times where I thought, hey, if they could have like polled or asked a few people, like, hey, do you guys have any suggestions, or would you mind like working in the room with them today and just kind of modeling some things for them? I think that I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I could have offered that and nobody ever asked. And it feels like I'm like kind of sounds prideful in a sense, but I just feel like I'm thinking of the church as a whole, and like we all have different
Yeah.
strengths and different backgrounds, and if we could use the strengths of each of our volunteers to better the whole, why wouldn't we do that? And so
Right.
I think sometimes I'm sure it's hard to like manage all of that and like figure out who you'd even ask, but I think that is more of a situation I've felt than the big picture for me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I can't think of anything specific, but maybe like an offshoot of that could be, send a survey as the church grows, and
mm,
hopefully that's happening in these ministries, is, send something out that's like, what are your gifts? Do you want to move age ranges? I don't
Yeah.
know. I've been doing the same age range for 3 years. I love it, but would I feel comfortable enough to be like, I want to move to kindergarten? I don't know. Maybe people don't feel comfortable. So maybe like something that's like, where do you feel like the Lord's calling you? What age? What gifts can you
Yeah.
offer? Because maybe not everyone wants to do the same thing week to week to week to week.
yeah,
So
Mm-hmm.
just putting that out there.
yeah,
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I think um I'm curious what you guys think about this kind of theory, I guess, of sometimes kids ministry leaders may think asking something else of volunteers may feel like it's a burden,
okay,
or like, oh, I'm going to ask them to do something else. And this is kind of like maybe alongside the lines of if you've been asked to fill in last minute or different things come up and you're like, oh, we don't have enough volunteers, would you jump into the classroom? And sometimes there's just this tension of like, oh, I don't want to ask them to do something else.
mm-hmm.
And there's the fine balance that kids ministry leaders kind of have to walk of like, well, we don't have enough volunteers, or we need to fill this spot, this person served last week and I'm going to ask them to do it again. And kind of along the lines of asking people that are gifted in certain areas, in my opinion, as like now I'm a volunteer, I'm like, oh, you're asking me about something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah,
Give me 2 hours and
yeah.
like I'll fill all of those 2 hours talking about them. But for you guys, like, speak to how you feel in terms of like scheduling and when you get asked to serve last minute, and like what are some things that come to mind when maybe you're filling in for a person or you're filling a hole. And I mean, you guys probably have been a part of churches that have experienced seasons where there's not enough people and there's not enough volunteers.
Always, every time,
Yeah.
all
I'm
seasons.
like, every church I've been to, I guess I just
Exactly.
these awesome churches, but
Yes.
Yeah.
So like kind of as a volunteer perspective, how does that make you feel, or like what is kind of running through your mind when you feel that tension of there's not enough volunteers and I keep getting pulled into the classroom and I really just want to have a Sunday off, and like what is that balance for volunteers, and what would be helpful for kids ministry leaders to know as they're asking people to
Mm.
serve, And as they're kind of walking this fine line of, I don't want to burden them, but we need people in the classroom,
Yeah.
and just that weird tension.
Yeah. That's a really hard tension, and I don't know that it ever goes away because of,
Probably not.
yeah, it's just the nature of it. I think to what you were alluding to, when I'm asked to do something that I'm passionate about or I feel like I have an affinity towards, like I want to say yes, and I will say yes
Mhm.
in any way that I can, because not only do I enjoy it, but I feel like it just benefits more people.
Yeah.
And so in those areas, I think it does help to get to know your volunteers, to know where their strengths are, so that you can ask them to do that. But in the same vein, I think it's a setting an environment where they can say no and not feel guilty.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to establish. That takes relationship, and that takes time. That takes setting up the expectation of giving them an out always, of like, hey, we need this, but I have other options if you can't, and it's okay. Like, don't feel
Yeah.
obligated. I'm just letting you know the need in case you can step in.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I really get that option, I want to say yes as much as possible, but I've said no before. There was
Mhm.
a season, I usually serve every week, but there was a season I needed to serve every other week. Like I couldn't do it. It was too much. I needed some time during the week, to just process. And so I asked for that, and they said no problem, But then
Yeah.
I'm back and ready to go and can do it whenever I'm available on the weekend. So, yeah, I think setting the environment is really helpful as well.
Yeah. That's good. What about you, Sarah? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I'd echo that too. Just, I mean, this happened to me like a couple weeks ago. Someone was out and they asked me to step in, and yeah, I'm like a yes, I want to do
Mm.
it because I love doing it, and I know that it's hard for them. They probably are like, oh crud, what am I gonna do? I don't have enough people, so you want to step into that. But on the flip
Mhm.
side, there is that again, going back to just grace and just knowing
Yeah.
that, hey, they might say no. What's my backup plan? So always having a few people in mind and not always relying on like your
Mm.
yes people, because
Yeah.
that can happen. And sometimes, like when I first got into ministry, I felt like sometimes I would just feel guilty, like, oh gosh, I'm going to miss and I feel
Mm.
terrible. And now it's coming from a different posture of like, I don't want to miss because this is where my
Mhm.
heart is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, so there's like that balance, for sure. But yeah, I've been lucky and blessed to have leaders that extend that out, and I felt that. But I'll be really transparent right now too. It's like sometimes it is hard, like for people that do serve weekly. And I know our lives look different than some people. Like again, I'm single, I don't have children. Like this is my calling, I feel like from the Lord. So it's different. But there are times where I look around a church of a pretty big size, and they're not serving, and
Mm.
it's hard. It's
Yeah.
sometimes like, I mean, even once a week would really help
That's a
out
lot.
our yeah. I'm
Once a
serving three
week.
times. I don't know what y'all. Thank you.
I mean, I do 7 days a week, but once a week would be fine.
So I mean, just as a volunteer and knowing, I know people serve in different capacities of the church. I
Yeah.
get that. I'm not, saying that they should always serve in kids ministry, because not everyone's heart is in kids ministry. And honestly, if you don't have a heart for kids ministry, I mean, you got to have a heart for kids. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's got to be there or it shows. So, but sometimes it is frustrating, and maybe the ministry leaders are feeling the same way. Like I know we can have more volunteers, and they don't want to be like every week just pounding, like, come on, you got to volunteer, because yeah, it
Mhm.
does. Sometimes it comes off in a way, but I don't know. I don't know. I have a heart for it, so I think people can step in. Maybe I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was thinking about what you're saying with that, Sarah, of just like not everybody can serve or step up in different seasons. But I think something that's helped me, um, always feel more freedom to say yes, is the expectation that's been set of like the most important thing is just your presence. Like you don't have
Mhm.
to come in and be an expert and like give this high energy. I'm a high energy person. I go crazy when I'm in front of the kids, but that is not like required of me, in the sense that like
Yeah.
your presence and just your being with those kids, that's what we're expecting. And so if you can just come and be in the room and love on these kids, like you might not know the curriculum ahead of time, we're going to provide it for you. You might not have everything, uh, eloquently frequently said, that's okay. I would just want you to be there. Can you just be there?
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's not saying that you're just sitting in the room and not interacting, but
Right.
just setting the bar at a reasonable expectation that doesn't feel so overwhelming to say yes to, I think is helpful as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
That's so good. Okay, well, the last question we always ask is usually if you were talking to someone who is brand new into kids ministry, what would be your words of wisdom or advice? And I want to tweak it a little bit. So, what would be your answer to if you were talking to someone who was brand new to leading a team of volunteers? And this
Mm,
obviously is specifically to kids ministry, but if you were talking to someone who was jumping into the role who now had a team of 30 to 200 volunteers and they were managing them, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
Have fun.
yeah.
Make it fun. I mean, I do think fun is a big part of it. It's hard to do when you feel the weight of having to lead volunteers. I realize that.
Mhm.
But I think getting to know your volunteers, inviting them in to be co-laborers with you. I mean, they're your brothers and sisters. We all have the same goal. Like, here's what we're doing. How can we do this together? How can I support you? How can you invest more? Like, how can we do this together? I think is a
Yeah.
great foundation to lay, and it helps you get to know them, and you do have more fun when you're with people you know.
Yep.
um, and kind of what I was alluding to before, just your both our presence as volunteers, but the ministry leaders just presence.
Mhm.
I just can't speak to it enough because I have been in environments with different leaders, where I just didn't even know who the leader was. Like, I hear their name and I think they're on the web page and I know that they're running this thing, but I have never talked to them before. I don't see them walking
Yeah.
around. They're in their office. Maybe they're in meetings all the time and they're super busy, and that's understandable. But I didn't feel any kind of connection to them at all. And so
Yeah.
therefore felt very lost in the environment. And so just the presence of being around and being available, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
What about you, Sarah?
Same. I mean, yeah, don't take yourself too seriously. And, set a fun tone, clear communication.
Mm,
If, I love getting text reminders or emails and like, I want to know, like, how are we growing? How can
mm,
we pray for you? Like, just
Mm.
give me anything like that, that I can walk alongside you to.
yeah.
And again, just have grace. Like, know that it's not going to be perfect. It never will be perfect till we're in glory.
Mm,
So just just roll with it. There would be times that you're short because everyone got the stomach flu, and it is what it is, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, so yeah, I think those would be a few of my things.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a good way to end of like your volunteers do care. They do care about you as kids ministry leaders and they want to know how to pray for
Yeah,
you and how to pray for the ministry. And so I think
yes.
that's great. You guys, thank you so much for being on this episode of the podcast. I'm so grateful for you. And it's fun to serve alongside you. It's fun.
Yeah. Same.
ditto.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks again.